And we're live on the Dusty Feet.
There you go.
Joey Christmas is in the house.
Pastor Joe is here.
Pastor Joe is in the house. So we have Joey.
Yep.
We have the Bible Project. And we have some new talk. It's something different tonight on the Dusty Feet.
That's it.
So that's my real mellow song after all that energy, right? Okay, so Joey's in the house. So senior pastor at the Vine community here in Somerville. And like I said last week, I was some surprises. And not surprises, just a shift and change. We've been doing the joyful noise. We're not going to depart the joyful noise because we have another surprise coming in September with the joyful noise, which I'm again excited about. But I decided there's something that interested me, and I want to give it this title for topic: Branches on the Vine. Okay, branches on the vine. Let's remember, we are branches on the vine. We are not the vine, right? We're branches on the vine. So like the Vine community is a euphemism for a bunch of branches, right? We call us a bush, right? Something, I don't know, but it's a euphemism for a bunch of branches. But branches on the vine. All these different branches that are connected. So I want to take us real quick on a connect the dots talk real quick, because I want to put a mental picture in your head first before we start off on our topic. Okay, so let's click on here. So it's going to get a little weird for a second. So just don't freak out on me, because it is going to get a little weird. So here we go. Okay, so no, I didn't want that on there yet. Yada 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 yada. Where are we? Okay, so what we have is, let's do this. There we go. Okay. So the vine is Yeshua, right? Not really much difficulty and challenge in that, right? And the rest of us are the branches. So in this connect the dot thought, that all those different branches all eventually connect to Yeshua, and Yeshua gets you to the Father, right? And not just the Father, but also time beyond your life. Is that fair? Okay. So you could call the big dots on there bigger groupings of people, or I don't know. I don't know if I'd go with more important. I think that's kind of a misnomer, because I think that there's value in each piece of the puzzle. I think some are more under God's test and under God's expectation and direction, fair, in that setup, but we want to do that. So that said, what I want to go with that next one that I want to have up was another dot thought. These dots, all different thoughts. The dots are the same. Each of those three pictures, the dots are exactly the same. The dots, location, number, placement. So it depends how you view things, is how you connect the dots.
That's right. Yep.
Okay. So we have this point where we think, I know how to connect the dots. I got the dots connected. Look at my picture. It makes sense. I think maybe we're going to be surprised when God looks at our coloring book and our connecting of the dots. I think he's going to find. He's like like looking at a third graders or a first graders or a second graders coloring book, and you're
Yeah.
going to go,
Yeah, sorry, Bob. You went outside the lines.
you went out the lines, and it's outside the lines. There you go. So there's a color, and in their mind, the general color there gives them what they want,
Yep.
and they're comfortable with it. Some of them, they lack control. I don't know what that is, and my mom, for instance, when she colored, she would take the crayon and draw the outside of the on the line. Say it was a blue section, so she'd do around the blue and then shade in blue. So she led boundary and focus to the colors. And it was beautiful. Her stuff was great. Me, I'm a scribbler. That's close enough for me. You know what's weird though? I don't do that with butter on toast. That's another story. Okay, so
You digress.
I digress. Okay, what we're going to talk about? Where is it? There they are. Okay, what we're going to talk about tonight is with that in mind. Keep the dots and the picture and the thing in mind. Okay, I want to start with a confession. Okay, that I have lumped too many times the term Christianity into a bundle, and that's not fair. Okay, it's not, and I have the lenses, my experience that I have might tend to have me lump that in.
Yeah.
Okay, but where my experience is conservative Baptist and conservative non-denominational, like John MacArthur. Okay, conservative non-denominational. Okay, and then I have exposure to some more contemporary non-denominational, some more contemporary Christians, some more Episcopalian, some different things on exposure. But I was lumping that into this group, and it wasn't fair. So in my stretch, I was looking at, and I can thank my brother James Michael Wern out on the West Coast with his group, and we were talking a little bit briefly about what his group was studying at the time, and he brought up the Bible Project, and they were looking at different things, and I said, I'll go check it out because it's worth a check.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we check out the Bible Project, and they're two guys. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. The founders, Tim Mackie and John Collins.
Yep.
Okay, and they have a team now that drives this whole thing, but their approach is, again, not to sound stereotypical or bunch, but they're akin to an Aleph Beta on the
Right.
on the Christian side.
Right.
If that's
Where
fair.
you have Aleph Beta over here, you
on
have
Jewish, you have
the
their
Bible
their
Project
right,
here.
right, and I don't.
Both on two different ends of the spectrum.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
to speak.
but they're closer than say an ultra Orthodox Catholic scenario and an ultra Orthodox Jew,
Yeah.
Hasidic Jew on these points where they're further apart. Aleph Beta and Bible Project are closer to.
Yeah, I would agree with
They're-
that.
yeah.
After watching a few of their videos.
Yeah. And it's interesting because they bring up viewing Scripture and viewing Scripture stories in a very different way than I'd ever heard spoken in church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was actually surprising, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I felt like I was in the same place you were, where it's real easy to lump. You take Christianity, you take Judaism, you take all these things, and we can lump them into one box. And we're all guilty of it, not just you. And it was refreshing, actually, to watch some of their videos and to see their point of views and to see how many point of views they had that I actually was agreeing with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's this it's the scary. It's weird. Skip Moen made a statement, and it's one of those that always I struggle with in this, is that neither side wants us. He made that statement. It was awkward to me, and I think that statement alone has when it stands on its own, meaning there's more to it. So let's just use the statement alone, standing on that, is a not a divisive statement, but one of those that doesn't sound like you're looking for a connection, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to be that in either way. If anything, I want to be a connector, if that's fair.
Yeah.
Okay. When I build out my studio, with a new one, I have a Torah bridge that I had built for my train set.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it just kind of was a good mental picture for me. It was how I was looking for a teaching tool that I might do years down the road for a teaching tool. I won't remember on the trains and the modules and all that kind of stuff, and the pieces and the puzzles that goes together. These guys, the Bible Project, are one of those branches to me.
Yeah.
Okay, they are definitely seeking and connected to Yeshua. They talk about Jesus, and they seek Jesus, and they seek Him in everything, which is brilliant. Okay, and what that looks like in those pieces. So let's look at the first video. What the series they're going to talk about is theirs is how to read the Bible, and I went, let's take a look at how to read the Bible.
Yeah.
And they have a multi-part series. So I listed more in the description on the video than I think we're going to get to, because I think I put 4 of them in there. I don't think we're going to get to 4 because Joe and I want to talk. So, but I put those on there just to see how far we get. But it's pieces to the puzzle. I like how they build their. I like how they think on this. So we're going to watch the Bible Project and their series on this one, how to read the Bible. And the first one is, what is the Bible? So let's look at what is the Bible from the Bible Project.
It's one of the most influential books in human history.
It explores the big questions of why we exist.
It's inspired many people to do amazing things.
And confused many others.
And you've probably got one sitting around somewhere.
So, what is the Bible actually?
Well, the Bible is a small library of books that all emerged out of the history of the people of ancient Israel. And in one sense, they were just like any other ancient civilization. But among them were a long line of individuals called prophets. And they viewed Israel's story as anything but ordinary. They saw it as a central part of what God was doing for all humanity. And these prophets were literary geniuses.
Really?
Yeah, they expertly crafted the Hebrew language to write epic narratives, very sophisticated poetry. They were masters of metaphor and storytelling, and they leveraged all of this to explore life's most complicated questions about death and life and the human struggle.
So, there's a lot of different authors writing this book.
Yeah, and these texts were produced over a 1,000-year period, starting with Israel's origins in Egypt, then leading up to their kingdom with their first temple. But eventually, they were conquered by the Babylonians, who took them away into exile. Then, at a crucial moment in their history, many Israelites returned to their land. They built a second temple, they reformed their identity, and this is when the Jewish scriptures began to be formed into the shape that we have them today.
Okay, the Jewish Bible. What's in it?
Well, in Hebrew, it's called by an acronym, Tanakh. The T stands for Torah, sometimes called the Law. That's Israel's 5-book foundation story. The N stands for Nevi'im, the Hebrew word for prophets. And this section consists of the historical books that tell Israel's story from the prophet's point of view. Then you get the poetic books of the prophets themselves. The K stands for Ketuvim, the Hebrew word for writings. This is a diverse collection of poetic books, wisdom books, and more narrative. And the Jewish people believe that through all of these literary works, God speaks to his people.
Now, there were other Jewish writings being produced during this Second Temple period as well.
Yeah, a really diverse group of texts. And these too were highly valued in Jewish communities. And there was debate from ancient times about whether or not some of these should be considered part of their scriptures.
So, this is a lot of different writings over a long period of time. Why did they put them all together like this?
Well, altogether, these texts tell an epic story about how God is working through these people to bring order and beauty out of the chaos of our world. And it all builds up to a hope for a new leader who would come and renew all creation. And then the Tanakh concludes, and this leader never comes.
So it's an expertly crafted work, but it's missing an ending?
That's exactly right. Now, a few centuries later, a Jewish prophet comes onto the scene named Jesus of Nazareth. He claimed he was carrying the Tanakh story forward.
Yeah, so Jesus did a bunch of cool stuff, was killed, but his followers claimed he was alive from the dead.
Yeah, they said that Jesus was that long-awaited leader who would restore the world. And so his earliest followers, called apostles, they composed new literary works about the story of Jesus. They called these Good News, or the Gospel. They formed an account called Acts about the spread of the Jesus movement outside of Israel. And then they circulated letters to different Jesus communities all around the ancient world.
And they saw these writings as part of the scripture.
Yeah, the apostles wrote all of this as the fulfillment of that epic story found in the Tanakh. And they were continuing the literary genius of the Jewish tradition. They also believed that God was speaking to his people through these texts alongside the scriptures of Israel.
So that's the Old and New Testament. But what did the early Christians think of the other Second Temple literature?
Well, different groups had different views about some of these books, but we know they read them and valued these texts because they passed them along with the Jewish scriptures.
Okay, so we've got the Tanakh, the Jewish scriptures. We got these other Second Temple period works. Then the writing of the apostles about Jesus. And that's a lot of literature, so what's in my Bible?
So the Christian movement has taken different forms over 2,000 years, and from the beginning, all Christians recognized the Tanakh and the New Testament as scripture. And for centuries, much of the Second Temple literature was read as part of the biblical tradition. The Catholic Church eventually made it official and called some of the books from this collection the Deuterocanonical books. Some Orthodox churches used even more books from this Second Temple literature. And then in the 1500s, during the Reformation, Protestant Christians wanted to go back to the oldest writings of the prophets and apostles, so they accepted only the Old and New Testaments.
Okay, I think I got it. But how does a collection of books produced over 1,000 years by all these different authors tell one unified story?
Yeah, that's the question we'll address in our next video.
Hey, I'm John.
And I'm Tim.
This is the Bible Project. We believe the Bible is a unified story that leads to Jesus and has profound wisdom for the modern world. So we're creating videos to show that.
This was the first in a brand new series that we're starting, How to Read the Bible, but we have lots of other kinds of videos. You can find it all for free on our website at jointhebibleproject.com.
In fact, there you can find a handout that will accompany this video. It just goes into more detail in the information that this video is about, and lots of other resources. So check it out. You could also be a part of this by supporting us at thebibleproject.com.
Our goal is to make all these resources available for free to anybody, anywhere, and we can do that because of your support. So thanks so much, you guys.
Thanks.
Okay. So, we were just saying, had we ever seen that taught in a church that we've been to?
I can say I've never.
I was, when I saw that, I was floored. I have never, ever seen that told from all the breakdown,
Yeah.
ever. Now, that said, y'all out there might have heard that way. I just know that our experience so far, we haven't met anybody that's been taught that we've been attached to, that have said that they knew that coming in and those pieces. It's interesting. Again, it's about a paradigm challenge when they're viewing. Like, for instance, there's no such thing as the New Testament and the Old Testament. Those two terms do not exist. Meaning,
Right.
they weren't back then. in that setup. And as they built them, that didn't get formed until hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years after Yeshua's dead and the books exist and blah blah blah, and then where they started to separate the story. And the drive was to separate this God on this side and Jesus on this side, and they started this separation. So they created this phrase of New and Old Testament. And I don't know why that's still a challenge and a struggle from a scholarly standpoint. It's really not hard in that. And you get that. You got the Tanakh from them is just a Jewish breakdown of the 3 sections that they've lumped.
Right.
Yeah. The books into, because in a Jewish Bible, Tanakh, they're not even in the order that they are in ours.
Right.
Yeah. Which is interesting. It's like, well, okay, we're going to take your books, meaning because if you say there, because they're the ones that protected it.
Right.
Judah protected this for thousands of years before this point.
Yep.
Took books, and then not even the honor of keeping them in the order that they kept them in the fight. They had the 3 periods on the Deuterocanonical Bible, and then the other Orthodox. That's actually the Eastern Orthodox side of the split. Our church history, the church side versus Judaism's branches that have broken off, right? The branches are Eastern and Western split, and that was Constantinople and I'll remember later. But in this the Alexandria. Thank you. There you go. In that split, in this deal, that's where the eastern side of, when you hear Coptic Christians in Egypt, for instance, you hear that point? That's the eastern side. And so they have more books in theirs and cover those particular pieces.
Right.
And so when he's talking about some of those other books are the ones that are mentioned in Scripture later on, like the Book of Enoch, Jubilee, those that are mentioned in Scripture.
Yep.
And so they're referring to those pieces.
Yeah, the Ethiopian Bible has all that in there.
Right.
Yeah.
I think 88 books. It's a large collection. It was interesting. Even the development of needing to have this is an interesting setup. They mentioned it like a library of books. That tells a unified story. Okay. A scroll. There's a story that I heard once about a scroll, and a scroll that's different from a book. Once a book is written and it's bound, it's the book.
Right.
Okay? A scroll is designed to be appended to. You take the scroll, you unroll it. When you get to this part, you can append more and add to the story. The story has a continuity. You don't have to have another story and you make it, well, here's volume 1, volume 2, volume 3, volume 4. I can have a scroll that is the story. It's a themed running story. And if we actually took Scripture and thought of it as a scroll, that are these connected scenes in the story, and that they are a unified story, and we stitch them together, I think we see some
Maybe you should do that, Bob.
I should say, well, actually, funny you should say that. I'm hoping to have an example of that made. I've commissioned to something. Is that an old word? New word? I don't know. Commissioned something? Somebody that has a skill that I don't have.
Right.
To give me a visual for that. And so I have a visual that I want to use, and I'm hopefully that's happening. I probably should check on that to see what's happening, because I really would like to have that happen. But they really do have a very
Oh yeah, absolutely. And something that I've said before from behind the pulpit, so to speak, is that in the walk that we're in, if you can call it the Ephraim awakening, the Hebrew roots, whatever you want to, label you want to stick on it.
Right.
That I've really felt like for a long time that when you talked about the two being not too far apart, and I really believe that when you listen to Foreman, you listen to these guys, they both are a lot closer to each other than what they realize. And then I also feel like as this group that we are, I know Skip has said something about neither group wants us.
Right.
And it's okay because maybe some of them don't.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, the Father is waking up both sides. This is my opinion. There's an awakening taking place on both sides. And how important is that group that maybe at first was kind of like, from a Jewish standpoint, was kind of like, this isn't for you, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
And from our brothers on the Christian side going, that's Jewish, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
And so what I've seen is the example that we set in our walk is mirroring something that both of them can relate to. And that I always felt like these are the two bricks, and we're the mortar in between the two bricks is going to be that adhesive that's going to bring them together. And being a part of it, I think that's a major part of what's going to happen with our walk from the Judaism side and from the Christian side, and helping to bring commonality to both of them.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion, but
It's an interesting when you hear a story told and you listen to somebody and you go, did you hear? It's like in a police detective show, and the person blurt out something, and everybody does it into big, did you hear what you just said? You just confessed to the murder, or did this or did that, right? In that deal. And you go, are they playing? You want to hear, do you hear what you're saying? Because what you're saying is closer to some other thing than you thought. It's an interesting part where you go on those things. So let's watch the part 2, okay? The Bible Projects. This is how to read the Bible. This is the biblical story as we're stitching these things together. So this is the biblical story, and we'll enjoy this.
The Bible's an important book, but it's really long.
Yeah, it's a collection of many books written over a long period of time, but altogether they tell one unified story.
So, what's the story of the Bible?
Well, it begins by introducing us to a beautiful mind, the author of all reality, a being called God. And he has the power to take the dark chaos of the uncreated world and bring about order and beauty and a garden full of life.
And to crown this accomplishment, God appoints these creatures called humanity,
or in Hebrew, Adam.
And they're made as God's image.
Which means that they're commissioned to rule this beautiful world on God's behalf by harnessing all of its potential and creating even more beauty and order.
This is a story about humans using their power to do meaningful, life-giving work. But the question is, how?
Yeah, humanity now faces a choice that's represented by a fruit tree. So humans could partner with God and find freedom by trusting in his knowledge of good and evil.
Or
they could seize power and define good and evil on their own, which, God warns, will kill them.
And they hear the voice of a dark, mysterious creature that tells them the choice is simple. Take the fruit. It'll give you power and freedom to rule the world on your own terms.
And so they seize this knowledge, and as a result, they become suspicious and self-protective. It leads to fractured relationships, violent power grabs, and ultimately, a whole civilization, Babylon, that has redefined evil as good. And so, God scatters this corrupted human project.
And here the story of the Bible takes an important turn. We zoom into the story of a man and a woman who come out of Babylon, Abraham and Sarah.
Yeah, God promises that from them will come a new people, a nation that has another chance to make the right choice. And if they succeed, it will open up this new way forward for the rest of humanity.
And this is why the rest of the Bible story is about this family.
And it does not go well. Despite God's personal guidance, Abraham's family gives in to that same temptation to redefine good and evil on their own terms, apart from God.
Even when their best people were in charge, rulers who loved God's guidance and had divine wisdom, even they gave in.
And so Israel was warned by their own prophets that these choices would lead them back to Babylon, this time as conquered captives living in exile, and that's exactly what happened.
So even with God's personal guidance, Israel fails. Who can succeed?
Well, the prophet said that the story wasn't over. God's going to send a new leader to Israel to cover for their failures and to transform the people's hearts and minds so that they can make the right choice.
And so the part of the Bible called the Old Testament ends, and these promises are left hanging.
And then the biblical story continues into the New Testament. We're introduced to a man who comes from the line of Israel's kings, Jesus of Nazareth. And he said that he was bringing all these promises to their completion.
He confronted that dark, mysterious evil that all humanity has given into and resisted its power.
And then he announced that God had arrived to rule the world through himself. Jesus taught about God's definition of good and evil, and he said that real power is serving others. According to Jesus, it's people who love the poor and even love their enemies. These are the kinds of people who actually rule the world.
And that's confusing, but also really beautiful.
And so is the claim that the story goes on to make about Jesus, that he is God become human, to be for Israel and for all humanity what we could never be for ourselves. He came to take the consequences of our evil into himself, and his sacrificial love proved more powerful than evil, than even death itself.
So now humanity's presented with a new choice.
Represented by a new tree.
Stick with the old way of being human, or venture into this new way.
And in the story, those who choose the way of Jesus find themselves energized by God's own power. People who know that they are loved and forgiven by God can become people who love and forgive others in return.
The Jesus movement quickly spread throughout the world, forming these new communities of people who follow the way of Jesus.
But they faced problems. There was persecution from the outside by people in power, and inside there was confusion, even compromise.
Yeah, because following Jesus is really hard.
And so the movement's leaders, called apostles, they wrote letters to comfort and to challenge these communities to stay faithful to the difficult way of Jesus.
And they're called to hope for the day when Jesus will come and change everything.
And so the Bible ends by pointing to the future day, when all wrongs are made right, when evil is eradicated, heaven and earth are united, and humanity can rule the world together in the love and power of God.
Okay, so that's the story of the Bible, and it brings all of these books together.
But what's interesting is that each book contains a different kind of literature that contributes to this story in a unique way, and that's what the next video will begin to explore. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this Bible Project video. This is part 2 of our How to Read the Bible series. We've got a lot more of these videos coming and a lot more videos. You can see it all on thebibleproject.com.
We're a crowdfunded project, so you can support us on our website so we can make more videos and also download free resources there. Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay. They bring up some interesting points in the Bible story, and it's stitching across. Okay, and why there's a time is. Haven't said a sentence yet, have I? Okay, is there? Does time gap equal story gap?
That's a good question.
Okay, it's a thought provoker because I don't know how many of you know. I assume the larger majority of this audience does, but there are those that might not. Is that there's a gap in the story of the Israelites coming out of Egypt, and in the land there's 38 years that we don't have a story about. Okay, that it doesn't talk about their everyday, just merely that was a gap. And if you do it, there's a gap, and there's 38 years of no story. But is there no story? You know, I meaning, okay, so every day happened after that, and every day was you worked, you ate, you slept, you had kids, You interacted as a community. You had the community leaders dealing with community issues. Every day was an everyday issue. And when they get to this point, it's interesting because God isn't necessarily comes out after 38 years and says, you all been doing it wrong for 38 years. He really doesn't say that.
Right.
He says, okay, you've had this time. In this time frame, there's an entire generation that has died. We already know, Scripture what that gap was. So they had to die. So they all died in those 38 years.
Yep.
Okay? But their everyday happened every day, and it wasn't.
Yeah.
So the time gap between what we'd call the end of the Jewish Bible, right, to the beginning of the Christian Bible, which really is no such thing again. But at this time gap, there's actually books, there's actually scrolls, scripts, stories, let's go with stories, in between actually fill in that gap. So it's us that creates this larger gap.
Right.
It's true. It's us that creates the larger gap. So we've decided to arbitrarily make the gap big. And when you take out those books and you just end it with Micah and you do this, Malachi.
Malachi, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. You end it with Malachi and then you start with Matthew, right? And so now you go, there's a gap.
Well, it's supposed to be like a
Story's different.
400, another 400
Yeah,
year
it's
gap
4-year
or
gap.
something like that.
And so then we've created this gap when there isn't one really in the stitching of the story. And the story continues. We'd actually have to say the biggest gap is from when John gets the revelation, as
Right.
the Bible Project puts, which I really like. When John gets the revelation from there to us is the real gap.
That's a big gap.
Okay. But I'm not convinced that that's a gap. I think that is the scroll, the story, the theme, God's story is playing out. We've talked about it here. We've called it a symphony before, though, right? The symphony is still being played.
Yep.
Let's just say that in the breadth of time that you had, the beginning of the symphony sounded like David. Okay, whatever that sounded like, we have no idea. We talked about this,
Right.
right? And then now you get further along the line, and then you get to the great composers. So now you have orchestras and symphonies, and we broadened the sound spectrum. Okay, now you're at our part, and you have weird digital stuff, right? We create sound very differently, right?
Right.
Than we did. Non-acoustic, we go digital. We have more sound to do that. But that sound song story flows through time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And Scripture does the same thing for us. It's that same stitch story. I want to be part of that story. I don't want that story to be something. I want to be part of the story. I'm not there to. I want to be that story.
Right.
Is that fair?
Right.
Okay. But they mention, like he said before, that you have. It's not a story, and they're going to talk about the different types in literature. That I'm not. I don't want to be one of those people. It didn't say. This is going to be a tough one. I don't want to be like Yeshua.
If Redeem hears us, he's going to roll over.
He's going to blow a gasket, okay? And it is, okay? Yeshua had his function and his job. I am not him.
He had the role that the Father gave him.
Yeah, that's his role. And understand, in that role, there were, in a job, we call them multiple hats.
Right.
Okay? He has multiple things that are going on in that time frame. He is not God. He is, however, fully under, at that point, God is prepared to give him authority, right? It doesn't happen until after he dies, because that's when this all happens. But there is authority that he does have, and there's power that he knows that he has. So when, as they put it, the Satan, that's a whole nother
Right.
story. When Hasatan,
That's
the
a whole nother
Hasatan
video.
even, the Hasatan, which is a whole nother video, which I hope we get to cover. Hempson, he gets him in the human end and the other end in those areas that are going to affect him. Okay? I can't even have that same temptation. I don't have the turn to say, this could all be yours if you just bow. I have no authority to give up. I have nothing, because he's giving up something in this realm to do that. And basically was have his choice, you know. So Yeshua has his job, and I can't be. Now, that said, sometimes you would say the question, what would Jesus do? Right? That's a fair statement. That's not to be him, but what would he do in this situation with that teaching? How should I respond here?
Yep.
Okay. The thing that we often forget are, let's go back with what he said. And you go, well, I don't want to do that. I said, oh, okay. You're the one that said, what would Jesus do? And I'll tell you, well, I'll show you what he did. And we'll show you what he said to do. And I believe pretty much we can say that everything that he said to do, we have an example of him doing it. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Even
I would
turning
say
the
so,
other
yeah.
cheek scenario, remember? Because it gets this very controversial at the time, because they're expecting a guy that's going to take him out.
Right.
Right? And
Like we said before, they're looking for Ben David,
yeah,
not Ben Joseph.
right. And so when he says turn the other cheek, they're like, okay, no, you're supposed to smack their cheek, and then you get to be the boss, and this is what we're expecting from the Messiah, prophesied Messiah, okay? And in this struggle, he says, no, this is what, and then he does that exact piece. So
Right.
it is fair to say that he lived the example that he taught. But this story where he says, he came here and he became, like God became him, and I'm going, no, because the Father is still there, and who raises Yeshua? The Father raises Yeshua. So you can't raise yourself.
Right.
Just that minor details, confusing as that is, you really don't have that deal.
Right.
And I'm going to send something else. So I'm sending something else, and I'm doing this, and I'm still here, and and authority is now with me to do certain things. I'm going to go sit at the right hand. So he's at the right hand of the Father. Here's the Father sitting at the right hand. They can't be the same. The story, as you read the story through, reads itself. And if you read the story through, that's what's fun about it. When you take the time to read the story, the picture gets drawn. Now, there's another ability that these guys have. They draw a story. The screen will be like a blank scroll, a blank canvas, a blank papyrus. And then they scribble around the picture, and it draws in this picture. It's not a picture, but they stitch the story together around this piece, and it's really fun to watch on these pieces. And he said something, and we'll talk about this in churches. Why is following Jesus hard? They mention it, and it's, why is it hard? Okay.
Where do you think they were coming from when they asked that question?
I don't know. That's a great, and I would like to talk to Tim and John and ask them that question, because they mention the statement that following Jesus is hard, and I'm going, meaning, and it's fair, okay, that sometimes when we draw the mental picture of hard, we think of challenging, difficult. I can't lift it, right? I can't do that. Rather than the challenge of, I don't want to do that. So the one that makes it hard, the task is not hard.
It's me.
I make it hard.
Right.
Okay? I make it hard. I grew up making dinner difficult. Dinner is easy. The eating side, let's put it this way. Sorry. Take that back, because my wife, who's a chef, makes phenomenal meals, and she works hard at making the meal.
Yes.
So make no bones.
And my
I'm
wife
not saying
is watching right now, and she's a fantastic cook also, and it's a whole lot easier to sit down and enjoy the work.
To enjoy the fruit of their labor.
The fruit
Okay,
of their labor,
but eating is easy. Eating is easy. Okay, but when you're growing up as a child, I made dinner hard, especially on my folks.
Yeah.
I didn't want to eat my vegetables or eat all my potatoes. Eat my meal, because parents were like, you're teaching you that well-rounded meal is good and good for balance for food, and that's those teaches. And how you teach that varies. I made dinner hard. It was not hard to eat.
Right.
You know,
Right.
I was in my 20s. I'm not kidding. This is not a joke. I was in my 20s before I figured out that mashed potatoes are good when they're warm.
Oh boy.
Yeah, when they're warm, and I still don't eat lima beans. That's all the story. Dad, sorry, you and Jimmy can have those and enjoy your deal. Still don't do lima beans.
Yeah.
But hot food,
Yeah, it tastes better when it's hot.
yeah. When you're supposed to
Get a product
to do
placement
that,
here.
yeah, product. So we don't have Dunkin' Donuts as our sub-sponsor. Yes. That we're the ones that make it hard. To say it's hard is like I put the weight on the task rather than on the fact that for us.
And I will say this, from watching the video, if I had to guess, and I don't want to speak for them, of course, but I would say from the video, the part about it being hard to follow Jesus was, from the video, you saw the outside influence of things hitting you. And Yeshua even said, they will hate you because of me. If you follow me, you will be hated.
Right.
And I think that's more the lines that they were talking about. Then it shows a little dark figure with the tongue.
Yeah.
You know, it's whispered in your ear. And so the influence from both sides, from the human element and from the Hasatan side, those things coming in could make your walk difficult. You know, and then of course, like you just said, and we mess up ourselves. We can do it ourselves without any help whatsoever.
Yeah, it's our.
We can
Yeah.
make it very difficult.
All the time, it's make it difficult
Right.
on ourselves, and it's true that when people get choice,
Yep.
okay, and our children get choice, and we get choice, and our friends get choice, and our family get choice, and then we want our choice to be their choice.
Right.
And our worst example of that was kids, you know. And for me, and I said this just the other Torah study, I said it again. I said, I personally am the worst example to my kids to look back from a past. And this is my point. If my understanding of Jesus and God is changed, paradigm shifted, changed, okay? And I told them for years that this is what it was. Why? And I'll argue convincingly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why should they believe me now?
Right.
Why? Because I'm their dad. We make it hard.
Yeah.
You know, and I have to say that you can go talk to a stranger and they don't know your past, and they don't know your stuff and your street cred, right?
Yeah.
The deal, and that you've changed your mind, and everybody else should now embrace your new change. And so they're going to not like you now because your paradigm shift is going to have a challenge, and it's going to be hard for them. They'll choose which side they want to go, but it's going to be hard for them. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay. And we can go with one more short, and then we'll catch this, because I enjoyed this about the literary styles, and then we'll go further along in this because I like the different styles that are in Scripture.
Yeah.
Because we think it's not, and what the books are and are not, and then we'll talk about it briefly because we're getting close to the end. So let's take a listen to these guys, and we'll see.
Many books telling one unified story from beginning to end. but all those books were written in different literary styles.
Yeah, think of it like walking into a bookstore where every aisle has a different kind of literature. There's history or poetry or nonfiction. And when you choose an aisle and pick up a book, you're going to have very different expectations, different things that you're looking for.
Right, they're all literature, but they communicate in really different ways.
Yes, and so the same thing is true for the Bible. If you don't pay attention to what style it's written in, you will miss out on the brilliance of each book.
So, what are the main types of literature in the Bible?
Well, first and foremost is narrative. It makes up a whopping 43% of the Bible. After that is poetry, which is 33% of the Bible. And then there's what you could call prose discourse, which makes up the remaining 24%.
Nearly half the Bible is narrative.
Yes, and this is no accident. Stories are the most universal form of human communication. Our brains are actually hardwired to take in information through story.
And stories are really enjoyable. Why is that?
Well, stories train us to make sense of the seemingly random events that happen in life by taking those events and then putting them in a sequence. And then together you can start to see the meaning and purpose of it all.
And what links this all together?
Well, good stories always have a character who wants something. And then through these characters, an author can explore life's big questions, like who are we, or what's really important in life. And a good story always involves some kind of conflict.
Some challenge to overcome, just like in our own lives.
And that forces us to think about our own challenges, why there's so much pain or disappointment in the world, and then what can we do about it? And stories usually end with some kind of resolution, giving us hope for our own stories.
Since these are Bible stories, are the characters showing me how I should live?
Yeah, that's not quite the point. Most Bible characters are deeply flawed. You should not be like them. But we are supposed to see ourselves in them, which helps us then see our lives and failures from a new perspective. And without even realizing it, these stories will start to mess with you and change how you see the world and other people and yourself.
Now, there are different types of narrative in the Bible.
Yeah, there's historical narrative, but also narrative parables, short biographical narratives like the four Gospels. We'll look at all these in later videos.
Okay, next up is poetry, which honestly, I don't read a lot of.
Yeah, you're like most people. But 1 out of every 3 chapters in the Bible is poetry.
Yeah, why so much poetry?
Well, poems mainly speak through dense, creative language, linking together images to help us envision the world differently. Poems use lots of metaphor to evoke your emotions and your imagination.
Lots of fancy language, but wouldn't it be easier just to tell me what I need to know?
Well, think about it. In life, we tend to form mental ruts, and we think in these familiar, well-worn paths that are very hard to get out of through logic or reasoning. And what good poetry does is force you off the familiar path into new territory.
Sneaky.
And there's different types of poetry in the Bible. There's lots of types of songs or psalms. There's the reflective poetry of the wisdom books, and then the passionate resistance poetry of the prophets.
Okay, the last big literary type is called prose discourse, and it makes up a quarter of the Bible.
Yeah, these are speeches, letters, or essays. And the focus here is building a sequence of ideas or thoughts into one linear argument that requires a logical response. Like, hey, have you thought about this thing? You should also consider how it connects to this other thing. And if you do, then you will see that this is the result. And in light of that conclusion, therefore, you should probably stop doing that one thing so that this other thing will be the outcome.
So you're persuading me with reason.
Yeah, discourse forces you to think logically and consistently and then do something about it. Biblical discourse is found in law collections, in wisdom literature, and the letters written by the apostles.
Okay, so each book of the Bible has one literary style.
No, actually most books have a primary literary style, like narrative, for example, but then embedded in the narrative you'll come across poems or parables or a collection of laws. Every biblical book is a unique combination of literary styles.
And to read that book well, I need to be familiar with each literary type and how it works.
Yeah, so you know what to pay attention to and what questions you should ask. But before we look at each type, there's one more unifying feature of biblical literature that's really important and really cool, and that's what we'll explore next. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this Bible Project video. It's one part of a much larger series on how to read the Bible. You can find more of those videos and all of our videos for free at thebibleproject.com.
We're a nonprofit, crowd-funded animation studio, which means you can actually join us and help us make more videos. Again, go to thebibleproject.com. And one more thing. This video is lovingly dedicated to my former teacher, Ray Lubeck. He first introduced me to all the ideas that we explored in this video. If you want to learn more about these ideas, check out his book called Read the Bible for a Change by Professor Ray Lubeck. Love you, Ray. Thanks so much.
Okay, yeah, so tell them what you just told me.
I was not expecting that whatsoever at the very end to pull out the Jewish book.
Jewish meditation.
Meditation, yeah.
Literature. Okay.
Yeah.
This is, and so I want to say this carefully, so don't take this, is that notice in all of that, it's not a textbook. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's not a textbook. It's not there to lay out an educational system. Okay? It's not there. It's not. This isn't what you decide. This is how you're gonna this, because you say, well, yeah, because it's going to tell you how to live, and I go, it's going to tell you how to make choices. How to make choices that God may smile on those choices, right? But there's nothing there to tell you how to plant. Nothing there to tell you how to sow. Nothing there to tell you how to reap. Tells you it does. Okay? Doesn't. It's not that kind of book. It's not a science book. It's not defining time, space, gravity. It's not. That's not the purpose of the book. The book is the story of God deeply relational to his creation. Fair? Deeply relational to his creation and how that relation works. And the types of literature as you read through, that's the fun part, is realizing those layers in literature and realizing that the importance of the pieces of the puzzle. It's a stitched story. So if you leave something out, you're missing the story.
Right.
You can't say, well, I understand the biblical narrative, but I've never read Ecclesiastes, or I've never read, all of the Psalms, or something. Okay, you can't. It's a unified story, and all the pieces to the story, I'd say puzzles or elements. At one point where he has the story goes and it's told, and our minds are hardwired. Our minds are hardwired for story. Why? Because that's how it was communicated. Right? Yep. It's not until the last, in our lifetimes, where we have all this written down that the common man reads, right? That the common man is literate. Because that wasn't for, it hasn't been but the last, 200-300 years.
Yeah.
That common man has been literate. Until that point, it was just the continued telling of a story and the passing on of a story. And then those that were literate, that were the ones that told the story, continued to propel the story further down the road. And they realized the importance. The further it got away, the more the story could get skewed. So they said it was important to start to keep track of that.
You know who still does that as a general practice for their people? The Native Americans.
Oh my gosh, they're so good at it.
They've been telling the same stories to generation after generation after generation after generation after generation.
And they still do.
And they still do.
And they still do.
They still do.
Dr. Sakina, which I've had the opportunity to listen to when he came to Adad, and he told a story. And he is a master storyteller. And you really don't appreciate a good story till you have a master storyteller tell you a story.
Yep.
And you are engaged, draws you in, and you go, wow. And then you'd almost want to say, and then how do I tell that story to the next person, right?
Right.
Well, back then, you didn't. You said, let's all go hear the story.
Yep.
Which is why the Jewish feasts, for instance, exist,
Yep.
to go back to hear the story every year.
Yep.
So that you got a refreshing
Absolutely.
of the story.
So that it wouldn't be lost.
Right.
It would be, if they didn't
Right.
tell, that's why I really feel like the appointed times of Yahweh.
Yeah.
Oh, is it getting ready to end?
It's time. It's getting close.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The appointed times of Yahweh were for that. I think that time was very specific. And when you sit down and you tell your children
Yeah.
about Egypt, when you tell them about these things,
Yeah.
and you tell them about the Pesach, you tell them about all, everything. It was a verbal telling.
Yeah.
They all didn't sit down and crack open the book at dinner time. And,
Read the book
Yeah.
because they didn't. They had this, and then you pass it on to generations. We now have books. So I don't know. I think that's better. I think that's worse. I think there's a decent argument for both.
Yeah.
But that said, we have our Bible
Yep.
and we have our stuff, and then it flips to the parable. We've said it before. Much is given, much is expected, and
Absolutely.
so could God say, "Hey, you have the whole enchilada, right? That
Yeah.
somebody didn't have back 500 years ago, and you have it. And okay, so are you making better choices? I'm not convinced we are,
Right.
sadly enough. But that said, I think we're getting, those of us that want to seek are trying very hard to
Absolutely,
make better
yeah.
choices and do this together.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, just to introduce you to the Bible Project, we'll probably see them again. Not probably, I should say will.
Will. Yeah. Yeah.
We will see them again because I'm having too much fun in doing this. And like I said, there's some of those things that I don't 100% bite off on, and that's cool.
Yeah.
But there's so much just great and refreshing.
I was gonna use the same exact word. It was very refreshing to hear the perspective on
Yeah.
different things. So.
Yeah, and I love it. So, Peter Peak, go to, let's see, do I have it here? I don't know if I do. Yes, there we go.
Yeah.
That's it. See, that's what you get when you have it. I usually have it on buttons on over there. Go to TheDustyFeet.com. I thought I changed that font. Obviously, I didn't. Go to TheDustyFeet.com and you can ask questions. Bring up something. Whatever. That's the place to do it.
It's a
Topics,
safe place to do
subjectives.
it. That's
Yeah.
the thing. It's a safe
Yeah.
place.
So, thanks for staying with us tonight, The Dusty Feet, and we'll see you next week. We'll have Dorothy back, and we're doing part 5 on Skip Moen and Heschel. That'd be more the Jewish side of the equation, right?
Right.
On The Dusty Feet.
Absolutely.